Good evening, everyone, and welcome back for another Dungeon Master Crash Course. As I said in past videos, I haven't made a lot of stuff, mostly because I've had difficulty finding topics I want to speak on about. But recently, I found myself pondering about boss fights and found that I've got a few thoughts to put towards it, and I'd like to something I should speak on, I felt. So today we're going to talk about boss fights. Now, boss fights, I think, are a core piece of Dungeons and Dragons. I think, Dungeons and Dragons players these days are fairly familiar with video games, and most of them probably are gamers. And that's just a natural part of any sort of game, is you go through the dungeon, you go through the story, and there's always that boss, that final person you have to confront. Now, boss fights could be something more like some problem you have to solve, a puzzle that requires, solving an argument you must win. It may not be, hey, everyone draw your weapons, roll initiative, and let's kill this big bad guy. But I think I could argue, and I think most people would agree, that the roll initiative and take down the big bad evil guy is the archetypal boss fight, and something that we come to expect and want to see some great ones of in Dungeons and Dragons. And now the question is, how do we achieve that? And that depends a couple things. First, I would say, what level is the party, and what exactly are you going for? I mean, we could talk a whole nother video about using puzzles, using arguments, and using other non-combative ideas for your boss fight. But this is going to be about, rolling the dice and beating up the big bad evil guy. Now, I have run 2 full campaigns now, and I'm currently in the middle of running my third. And we are going to draw some examples from each one. And as the new one there's now 7th level, as I don't have chances to show, high level boss fights, but we'll talk about different boss fights and the things I've used in them to make them interesting. And there's a lot I could say, and I've got my little notes here on a little sticky note that I can kind of keep track and hopefully keep myself going in line. And the first thing I would say to make a good boss fight is it should be dynamic. Things should be changing. It shouldn't just be this. The status quo should not remain the same. And that could be because the environment is changing for some reason, because maybe there's kind of a doom clock, a countdown till the end. And with each turn, with each round, you get closer to, that doom clock reaching 0 and something terrible happening and the tension rising naturally. Or it could be, the boss is so powerful, the status quo changing in that heroes are going down, you guys are running out of spells, you guys are running low on HP, the tension rising because of that. Dynamic, you just want to keep things changing. And I think environment's one of the best ways to do that. I think it's one of my personal favorites to use. And it could be a lot of things. It could be the keep is collapsing, and so you're trying to fight the villain while your room is falling down on part of you. In the final fight for the campaign with Vishnu and Loki and that crew, they were in this demiplane that was literally shrinking in. Every round, I erased one ring of the field, and if you went outside that, it wasn't that you couldn't go outside it, was if you went outside it, you were in the void, and you had to roll constitution saves, and if you failed, you died, and you were erased from existence. Nothing but true resurrection or a wish spell could bring you back. And it was slowly shrinking in, and that was an issue. At one point, one of the heroes, I can't remember who off the top of my head, and he was staying back as a ranged fighter, trying to, just pelter these gods they were fighting, the Dark Six. And because this was shrinking in, he was like, I think I'm okay, and he stayed there. But then it went in, and I'm like, you need to roll a constitution save. And he's like, oh, okay. And I said, and he made it, and I said, congratulations, you are not erased from existence. He's like, shoot, guy, stay out of the black. And that was immediately raised the tension, and things were changing. Yeah, it wasn't, things were massively changing every moment, but it was changing. The battlefield was dynamic as it was slowly shrinking. So that's a dynamic. Keep things changing. And environmental dangers, I think, are a great way. You could use the shrinking. I've heard one example being there's a portal, this black portal to nothingness in the the chamber where the final boss fight is going on, and and the portal has its own initiative count, typically like 20. Layer actions are a way to use to give you that environmental dangers, and when you're fighting legendary bad guys, they're a great tool to use, and I would recommend using them. So that's one way of kind of getting this dynamic and environmental dangers without having to come up and be creative and figure out what you want to do. You can just steal layer actions. Hi, this is a cat. This is one of my cats. Say hi, Hungry. Hungry, I'm going to kick you down right now so I can work. The cat's been cooped up. They're demanding attention. So exactly, layer actions I think are an excellent example of what's going on here. The next thing I would say is your boss needs to have multiple things to do. Even if your boss is a fighter, just even like almost a fighter class, it's still important for them to have things to do, multiple things to do. That way they're not always just swinging their sword. Some of the big bad villains we envision are typically like, the evil wizard. And with an evil wizard, he's going to have lots of spells that give him lots of different things to do. Or a monster typically has a breath weapon, and it can fly, and it's got a claw attack, and it's got some aura effect maybe. And then so that gives you lots of things to do. But if you've got a fighter, well, give him stuff to do. Maybe he's got a couple abilities. If you look at, a 17th level fighter, they've got, and maybe 17th isn't a big extreme, but even a 10th level fighter is going to have a couple things they can do. Aside from just, swinging their sword or axe or whatever, your 10th level fighter is probably going to have some items they could use. Maybe he's got a potion he can drink. Maybe he's got, some other magic items that allows him to cast spells. Maybe he's got a wand of binding that he uses to allows him to try and, cast hold person on characters. Even though he's a fighter, even though he's then going to come at you with his 2 sword swings or something. It's important to keep things varied. And we see that with wizards and monsters primarily already taken care of for us. And I would just say when making up your own boss fights, if you create your own character, your own villain, or something like that, just make sure they have a couple things they can do. And legendary actions, I would say, are another good thing to do. Give them at least one legendary action, especially if they are a big baddie. The next thing I would say is we oftentimes envision the party going up against this one big hulking demon, the party taking on a solo dragon or the solo evil wizard. And a high enough level wizard probably could take on an entire party, but most of my best fights have always involved minions, have involved lieutenants, where the big bad evil guy has had some sort of party of his own. And that could be just simple minions, and it could be maybe he's got a lieutenant in there. I mean, when my players fought the Dark Six, it was 4 gods, because they'd already killed 2 of the 6. And then each of those 4 gods had his own minions. The Shadow had a group of assassins. The Keeper had a group of assassins. The Shadow had a couple of spellcasters. They fought the Fury, who brought in like a couple monsters. And I picked some like random monsters and stuff like that. And that way each one had their own little minions. Another example I'm going to use is my players fought a Necromancer. And she had 2 ogre zombies, 2 big brutes, but then also had a couple like normal zombies who were acting as frontline defense, who were acting as basically occupying the players and keeping them from just surrounding her and then just hitting her with advantage until she died. It also allows the enemies to get advantage of their own to protect their boss, protect the villain. And it's important to give the minions some variety. Again, I had with Necromancer, I had brutes and I had just regular cannon fodder, really. With the Dark Six, I had assassins, I had spellcasters, I had monsters that acted like brutes. Give them some variety, and that will help give your boss fights a variety as well. We talked about, giving the boss themselves multiple things to do. Well, having multiple minion types gives you, again, multiple things to do. So, point there. You do want to make it challenging, I think. I think it's important for a boss fight to be challenging. We want boss fights, I think, typically to be challenging. They should push the players. They should be, I think, typically a deadly encounter. This is the threat we've been building up for. If, that thing we fought a couple rooms back in the dungeon is more challenging than the actual boss, that can be a little anticlimactic. Unless the party has done something specifically, something creative to change the tide of battle. For instance, when they were fighting the Dark Six, I didn't know how they were going to survive. I was throwing a lot of stuff at them. Plus, like, all these monsters alone would have been a nice challenge, even though it was a party of, like, with their allies, I think it was like 9 17th level characters. That's a big party, and it was going to be tough. And then they were going up against 4 gods, and I had to, like, steal stuff from, like, the Demon Lords from Out of the Abyss and Vecna from The Critical Role by Matthew Mercer. I had to, like, use those as references to make 4 gods who were going to be insanely dangerous alone, let alone with minions. And I didn't know how the players were going to survive, but the players had creatively, one of their players, Nathaniel, had his wizard paladin Corin had gotten an item, had an item enchanted that allowed her to get maximum damage on a spell. It was a set of armor, and at the time he asked, I didn't even think about it, so I said, yeah, sure, it'll take you a lot of time. It's a very powerful artifact, but you can certainly craft that. And then he comes in, and the first thing they do in the battle is he casts Meteor Swarm using max damage. I mean, it was like he gets max damage like once a week or something like that, but he used it on Meteor Swarm, allowing him to annihilate all the minions in one shot, plus bringing down the entire bosses to about half health. I mean, it was insane, and that move alone is what allowed the players to survive. And I could cite all sorts of other examples, like, I'm trying to think of a couple off the top of my head. Let's see, when that same party fought, they fought this guy, Lord Darkhammer, and took over his castle, which became their castle. He was in a keep, and so they were having some issues of, okay, well, how do we storm the castle? And they used some creativity of going around and kind of coming in around the back and using some of the natural terrain to get inside the castle, but without having to, dispatch the guards on the way up. And that allowed them to get the drop on everyone, and which was a huge advantage. When the band group, Sonia, Esther, and those guys, they fought this sand scorpion mole. They used polymorph and Darren's instant fortress creatively to kill the creature in basically, I think, 2 rounds. What should have been a nice, good, long 6-round fight turned into 2 rounds, and I think took us a whopping, 10 minutes. So, creativity. It should be challenging unless the players creatively have a solution that defeats it. And if they do that, they will still feel just as satisfied. Even though it was easy, or at least much easier, they'll still feel satisfied because they recognize that their creativity, their thinking, is what basically saved them. So, be challenging. Also, DPS over HP. Now, DPS is more of a WoW term, and it would be more of DPR, damage per round, or damage per turn, however you want to put it. But I think it is more important to make your boss do a lot more damage than give him just a ton of health. In a campaign I've played, a lot of the bosses had a ton of health. I'm talking we just beat the main boss at 10th level. He had over 400 HP. And in past bosses, when we were something like 7th level, the bosses had 300 to 400 hit points. And it turned the fights into just slogs. Just terrible slogs of taking 30, it just wasn't even fun. When we spent the first, half hour burning through most of our high-level stuff, burning our biggest abilities and stuff, and knowing that this was taking this guy only to half level, and then slowly chipping him down with our lesser abilities. And it was boring, honestly. I started reading through some of the boss fights because I was so bored. And that was because our DM gave the monsters a lot of HP, but made it so their damage was not that big a deal. Over the course of the fight, it was a big deal. They had 10 points here, 20 points there, 30 points maybe if they got lucky. Yeah, it stacked up. And so over the course of the 10 rounds or so, it was long and it was dangerous. But it meant I could go 4 or 5 rounds without even really thinking about where I was. Granted, I was playing a tank. But even then, I'm not even worried about my health. I'm not even thinking of, oh gosh, I need to be at least aware of the healing status. No, it was, whatever. At some point, I'll get down to enough health where I'll have to heal myself. But then I'll just heal myself a bunch, and I'll be good to go for a while again. personal opinion, boss fights should not go above 5-6 rounds. If you get it beyond the 5-6 round mark, it had better be super dynamic. Otherwise, it's going to turn to a slog, and no one wants a slog. I think no one. I don't know. Maybe there's someone out there. Maybe there's one viewer saying, I like slogs. Well, congrats for you. No. Instead, I would say make your boss more dangerous. Give them higher damage. It's okay. They're the boss. Make them hurt. Or maybe give one of their minions a lot of damage. Maybe you're fighting the wizard, and, the wizard's spells can be pretty powerful. Or maybe you're fighting the fighter, and the fighter itself is more of a thief or a rogue. So maybe he doesn't do a ton of damage, but he's got other stuff. But make it dangerous. Let the players be like, oh crap, we might die here. Only a couple rounds. It shouldn't take 6 rounds for them to say, oh yeah, we're low on health. We might need to heal up in the middle of the fight. So yeah, that's those are all my points. Those are, make it dynamic. Give the boss multiple things to do. Give them minions and a couple different types of minions. Don't just say, okay, it's a necromancer plus 6 regular zombies, or the dark wizard and he's got like 4 knights. No, make it so one knight's a spellcaster, or one knight's a cleric kind of thing. One knight's maybe a barbarian, one knight's maybe a natural archer, one knight's also a frontline fighter. Give them different things to do, and that will kind of overlay on the boss having multiple things to do. Make it challenging, and don't let it take too long. Don't increase the HP a ton. They should still have to chip away a good block, but instead give them a higher damage. And you can use the minions to help kind of draw out the battle without really ranking up the HP. If the players are also having to fighting a bunch of minions, that's going to distract them from the boss, allowing, soaking up their damage and making it so they're spending all their DPT on the minions, allowing the villain to last longer, even though he may not have a ton of HP. So, thoughts there. Now, I'm going to compare 3 examples I have of boss fights to kind of show how this applied, and when I didn't apply it, why it went so bad. And the first is the Dark Six, and I've already talked about this a lot. It was dynamic, the field was shrinking, the bosses were incredibly varied themselves. The Shadow was a spellcaster, the Keeper was an assassin, the Fury was a brute, and who was the last one? Shoot, I don't remember the last one. Oh gosh. And I know this is terrible of me, and I should have thought about this, but I mean, the point is, they were fighting, the Traveler, who was kind of an assassin spellcaster kind of thing, somewhere in between the two. And because they had varied things to do, and it kept it interesting. They had lots of minions, but that was solved, of course, very quickly by a full power meteor storm, which does 960 points of damage, by the way. If you max out, it's 960 points of damage, or 480 on a successful save. Fun fact. And it was challenging, except the players had a creative solution. But even though they had a creative solution, they still nearly died. One of the characters died. The dwarf, they had the Dwarf King come with them into this final fight, and he died. And because of that, the Moradin is now gone in my campaign setting. And that's actually a major lore in my new current campaign. Moradin is gone. We're playing in the land of the dwarves, and Moradin is gone. But due to stuff, the Dwarf King was able to be resurrected, and now he's ascended to godhood. So now he's the new dwarf god. It's actually, I think it's fascinating. I like it. My players from the old campaign who are now in this campaign, who are aware of what's going on, they're like, oh my gosh, our actions have affected the world, and that's really cool for them. So yeah, it was challenging. Even though they had a creative solution, it was still challenging. And I think it went for about 8 rounds. But and that was going on a little long. We were kind of starting to get tired. But fortunately, the fact that it was a dynamic and things were changing, people were going unconscious, people were almost dying, it helped keep it from turning into a slog. Now, I mentioned then this fight against the lieutenant. This was a low level fight. How was it dynamic? Well, it wasn't super dynamic. I didn't really have a lot of environmental, but one of the things I had was and this is kind of connects also to the multiple things to do. I had the necromancer able to resurrect one of her zombie minions every round, and it would come back with half health. and that gave her a different thing to do. She was also a cleric, uh, so she was able to cast a couple spells while also swinging a hammer around. So that gave her multiple things to do. And this was only done at 4th level, guys. So this was a low level boss fight. So this can be done and applied to low levels. She had a couple minions. She had some brutes. She had some just meat bags. It kind of was challenging. It wasn't super challenging, and the players had gone into this already weakened. They hadn't rested. They were low on spells. They were low on HP. So I did scale back. I was going to throw in another brute in there. I was going to throw in a couple more meat bags in there, but I scaled that back but kept it challenging. And the brutes did a lot of damage. Several of the players went unconscious during the fight, and the fight only took about 5 rounds, and went that long simply because the necromancer was able to resurrect minions every round. So there you go. Now, the last example I have is one of the times where this didn't go well. This was the final boss fight to my band group campaign where they fought the Scion of Chaos, who was the one that they found out was pulling the strings the entire time. He was the one who had killed Fritzless's wife, sending Fritzless into this, self-destructive depression spiral that caused him to become a lich. He was the ones who introduced the Temple of Elemental Evil to some people, which has led them to become the cultists there. He also was the ones who screwed around with a bunch of the party a couple times. I mean, by the time they ran across him, they didn't like him. Esther especially really hated him. And even the other players were ready to kill him. So it was hopefully going to be a great battle. Well, the battlefield was kind of dynamic. He brought them to a little demi-plane, and he had like pit traps would open and close randomly. So there were some dynamics there. He was primarily a spellcaster, so he had something to do, but I mostly gave him some DPS spells, so he didn't have a lot to do. It was mostly how did he hurt the players? Who did he hit, and how many was he able to hit at a single time? He only had one minion. I gave him like a barbarian-style lieutenant, like a Death Knight kind of thing, who just raged, ran in, dealt a bunch of damage, but because he ran in, the players surrounded him and quickly killed him, so he was gone very quickly. And so it really wasn't that challenging. Because they brought their full force to bear, the party was able to wipe out the knight very quickly and then wipe out the Scion itself very quickly, so it wasn't even that challenging. And sure, I kept the DPS up over HP, so it was damaging them pretty quickly and not a lot of HP, but because of other factors, it still didn't last that long, and so even the DPS didn't really have much of a chance to really hurt them. So there we go. And I talked to him, and even after that session, the players were kind of like, yeah, that was a little, gross, not that great. I mean, a better example from that same campaign would have been their fight against Fritzless, where dynamic wasn't super dynamic. Nothing really changed in the battlefield, but they were fighting a lich, and liches have lots of spells and was able to do lots of different things. He summoned an eye tyrant that they had, death tyrant, that's what they call it, a death tyrant, a super beholder, basically, that the players had fought previously. And then the death tyrant had lots of things it could do, and that kept it interesting that way. So now was his minion, was basically him and the death tyrant, but because they're so powerful and because they had such different things they could do, it kept it interesting. It certainly was challenging, except Tasha's Hideous Laughter from Elias's Osborne was able to keep the death tyrant out of the picture, despite everything they were doing, despite damaging it. The thing could not roll above a 10. So because the dice were really in their favor, and because of Tasha's Hideous Laughter, the players were able to neutralize half the threat with one spell, and then focus on Fritzless. Plus, there was some, I had the character moments with Sydney's cleric Ivy, coming back, and then turning on them, but then also turning on Fritzless and going back and forth. So I guess there was some dynamics there. As for DPS over HP, yeah, liches don't have that much HP. They have less than 200, and Death Tyrants I think have over somewhere between the 200 to 300 range. So it's a good chunk, and they have lots of DPS. I mean, heck, a lich can cast Power Word Kill. They have some high-level spells. And 2 of the players died. Again, it was Esther and I think Danny or something like that who died. But then I allowed Ivy to, to basically sacrifice herself and allowing her to resurrect our 2 heroes. And that worked out well. But again, that was scary. The players were really worried about that. They're like, crap, we've killed 2, not unconscious. No, dead. So it definitely was that DPS over HP. So that one was a much better example. And the players were like, yeah, that was good. That was satisfying. So there's some different examples of some boss fights. Hopefully, all my ramblings were fairly comprehensible and cohesive, and hopefully, you guys can use this to apply them to your own boss fights and help make them more interesting and much more fun for your players. I hope that you guys are getting good stuff. I'm sorry I'm not getting more stuff out, but I'm not having a lot to say. I've got one coming out on travel soon, as I'm testing out a couple different how to make travel interesting, how to handle long distance travel. I'm testing out a couple different systems and tweaking which ones I like best, and then I'll do a episode on that. If there's anything you guys want me to hear me talk about, absolutely just comment and I'll absolutely do videos. I will take requests, absolutely. But when it's just I have to think about stuff, I wait until I've got something to say. I thought about doing campaign diaries for this new one, but I feel like I should first go back and do a campaign diaries for the band group since I haven't finished that. Maybe. We'll see. I wouldn't get my hopes up, guys. I'm just busy and I just don't have good times to film as much anymore. This is like one of the rare times where I have a good opportunity to film, and yeah, and it's kind of nice though to also not have to think about, oh, I got to do a campaign diary, and I would have a lot to catch up on this new campaign anyways, so I wouldn't count on it, but I'll definitely share stories about it if you guys want, and they'll come up of course during crash course videos. But in the meantime, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you're getting stuff out of this channel, and as always, stay cool.